it is a pleasure and an honor for me to introduce Dr. Peter Rosenbaum. Dr. Rosenbaum joined the Department of Pediatrics at McMaster University back in 1973 and became full professor in 1984. In 1989, with his colleague Dr. Mary Law, he co-founded the CanChild Center for Childhood Disability Research, now recognized worldwide as a leading center of innovative and groundbreaking childhood disability research, including the creation of clinical classifications and measurement tools, and of course, for its knowledge translation activities. Dr. Rosenbaum's career has focused on a range of interconnected aspects of the childhood disability field, the daily functioning of children and youth, the well-being of families of children with long-term impairments, ways of thinking, talking, and acting to provide services to these kids and families, the language we use to talk about clinical conditions like cerebral palsy and other impairments, and how to communicate these many issues to families, learners, and the general public, including policymakers, in plain and accessible language. So that was the formal introduction for Dr. Peter Rosenbaum. I'll give you my very briefly personal perspective. I think Dr. Rosenbaum is one of the top clinician scientists, not just in Canada, but around the world. Many of you know him, many of you have interacted with him through his different roles in the clinical research and advocacy space. The specific presentation today about the efforts, I think is going to be a very influential one. Many years ago, when I invited Peter to talk to my students in the Bachelor of Health Sciences, he presented this framework that we're going to hear about today. And I can tell you that it completely changed the way we think and talk and teach about child health development within the context of families and their real lives. And that's what we're going to hear about today. Peter, thank you for doing this. Thank you for your leadership throughout the years. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Stelios. I wish my mother were here to hear that. She probably wouldn't believe it. Stelios has given most of my talk, which is very helpful. But essentially, what I want to do is tell you a story about the ways in which some of our ideas are having a pretty considerable impact on the field very broadly. And as Anna said at the beginning, this is not about autism. This is about how we think and talk and act in our shared field of childhood disability. So I want to talk about this with respect to where we've come from and to show you some evidence that this actually matters, because lots of people have lots of ideas, and we've got to move beyond that's a great idea to saying, show us whether it works. And that's up to you to decide. I will leave time for conversation and questions. Please, please, please challenge me. This talk has been given once or twice before and is better today because of the last time's version and the questions that were asked. So I'm a developmental pediatrician, which is to say a pediatrician who has a lifetime interest, as does Olaf, in children who grow up with disabilities, usually neurologically based. And we have embraced the World Health Organization's framework for health, which I'm going to show you, because I think it brings together some really important ideas. So what I want to talk about, first of all, is to look back briefly at where we've come from. And I say we as health professionals, some of you may be parents, all of us are citizens of the community, and we have been acculturated in particular ways that influence what we see, how we see it, how we talk about it. I want to talk about how these ideas concern families and parents who come to us because they have worries about their child's health or development. I'll explore how the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning framework And our effort to animate that with the F words has influenced the field. And then I'll illustrate this with some applications of these ideas and some testimonials to say that we have a ton of evidence that these ideas actually matter to people. So I want to start by looking back at where we've come from. And this is meant to be analytically critical rather than rude. You heard that I started my training in 1970, and I'm older than everybody on the screen. I'm also have been in the field long enough to be able to say that I contributed to the perpetuation of the old ideas and hopefully have contributed to some of the new ideas. So if we start by looking back, the culture of disability has been strongly influenced by how we've been trained to think and act about childhood disability. And that's in our formal training in psychology or therapies or medicine or psychology or whatever, but also informally with respect to what we read in the newspaper and what we hear in the community at large. And two things that are really important that I want to emphasize have been done with good intentions. I attribute no bad motives to anybody. First of all, is that we've adopted ideas from acute care medicine. And that means that we are thinking, as we would do in the emergency room, when somebody comes in with abdominal pain, we have to say what's going on, because what's going on will determine what we do about it. And so the connection between a diagnosis and intervention is essential. And we've imported that into our field where, as I'm going to suggest, that really doesn't work. The second thing is people often say that we work in the field of childhood rehabilitation. And rehabilitation is what we do to help people get back to, i.e. return, to previous function, which is what I would need after a stroke or a heart attack. But it is not a good model for thinking about children who have child-onset impairments, because we're not returning them to previous function. But these two sets of ideas have influenced us enormously. And the implications are that we've been taught to believe we need a medical diagnosis. And in many places, you can't start intervention until you have a diagnosis. Entirely stupid idea, I mean. The second is that the treatment needs to be based on the diagnosis and should aim to fix the problem. And I wish that were possible. The third notion that is implicit, if not explicit, in our work with children is that normal function is the treatment goal. And this is the idea of rehabilitating children. Since we can't say what they did before, we say, okay, our standard will be, let's help them function normally. And I'm going to suggest that normal is a dumb idea and should be removed from the language. And of course, we've been trained that service providers are the experts. And so the notion is that experts, i.e. ourselves, should diagnose, treat, and fix, if only that were possible. The reality is that I don't want to disappoint anybody who might have had fantasies about the role of medicine. We don't actually fix or cure most things in medicine. We make a huge difference to people's well-being. So this is not a cynical comment about my field, our field. It is, however, to say that we've got to be a little more modest in our expectations about fixing and curing. And sadly, there are still people trying to fix kids with impairments. And this leads to people saying, isn't it sad? You must be so dedicated, meaning, why couldn't you get a proper job? And they say, well, what can you do for them? And anybody who makes the mistake of asking me gets an hour-long answer. The idea is that there is a whole lot we can do, despite the fact that our interventions are based upon functional impairment, and zero of our interventions is diagnosis specific. Now, I throw that out there as a challenge for people. If you want to put some question or comment in the chat, we can, in the Q&A, we can discuss this afterwards. But basically, we're not treating autism. We're not treating cerebral palsy. We're not treating Down syndrome. We're treating functional issues that are associated with those and other conditions. And the answer to our what can you do for them is to think differently, to recognize that there are things under our noses that we haven't seen. And the ICF framework, which I'm going to show you, and the F words have expanded the discussion, and you can tell me whether you agree with these ideas. One of the really interesting new ideas about health is the idea that health is the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of social, physical, and emotional challenges. This was written in the context of adults with functional issues, but is a really interesting, different way of looking at the world than the notion of normality. And so in this way of thinking, functioning, however it is done, regardless of ability, regardless of quality, can be understood as evidence of health if you can do it to your satisfaction to address the issues that are important in your life. And the ICF framework is helping to guide us. This is the framework that the World Health Organization recreated in 2001 or published in 2001 after 20 years of a previous, more naive version of these ideas. The 1980 International Classification of Impairments, Disabilities, and Handicaps never really caught on. But in the 20 years from the time it was published to the issue of this in 2001, a lot of work was done by a lot of people, including a lot of people with disabilities. And this led to the framework that you see in front of you now, which reminds us that any health condition, you'll see that ASD is at the top, but if we were a group of people working in adult or elder care, we might have macular degeneration or Alzheimer's disease or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease at the top. The idea is that any health condition has manifestations. Something's going on in body structure and function. The manifestations that we see clinically are usually impairments in activity, challenges with thinking, functioning, moving, seeing, etc. The World Health Organization, I think, wisely identifies the notion of participation or engagement in life in ways that are meaningful to you, regardless of your health condition, as a key idea. And they also bring in formally two notions that everybody knows and then ignores. Personal factors, what makes you as an individual with condition X a unique individual rather than another gallbladder in bed 4, which is the way I was trained in medical school. And environmental factors, of which there are thousands. And these have to be formally considered in our formulation of the situation of the individual. And this is a rhetorical question since I can't see your hands being put up right now, but I hope that people are aware of this set of ideas. And if you're not, that you will be, because this non-categorical, non-denominational approach to health brings in the biological, the psychological, and the social into a single integrated framework. And what we like about it is it's a framework for health for everybody. This is not about autism. It's not about macular degeneration. It's about health for everyone. The words are neutral, interested in activity and participation, recognizing the challenges that may be associated with restriction in activity or participation. Everything is interconnected. And so this is a dynamic system. And we don't have to start our intervention just with the diagnosis and the intervention at the level of body structure and function. We can start anywhere and, quite frankly, everywhere, and look for how an intervention at one component may impact other components of this situation. So, for example, promoting activity, however it's done, may have an impact on body structure and function. And we don't necessarily have to start with body structure and function. And then when you can walk, you'll pick up your bed and everything will be fine. And this also focuses on strengths and what people can do. Now, young Willem Porter, my colleague and friend at CanChild, and I had been talking about trying to bring these ideas to life and had thrown around some F words in a non-systematic way. And in 2011, I was asked to give a talk in the UK and decided I would try to do this. And young Willem, who was literally in the next office, and I worked on this talk together. And when the talk was ready, young Willem said, we ought to write this up. And I can tell you, for those of you who are looking for something to do, if you've given a talk, you basically have a paper. All you've got to do is save the PowerPoint slides as a Word document, and everything's there. So we wrote this paper in half a day because it was all ready in the talk. And this paper has been downloaded more than 82,000 times, which is quite ridiculous. It's been cited in the literature 680 times and counting. We've been invited to present talks on this all over the world. And I'll show you just a couple of examples of the translations of the work. The original title was The F Words in Childhood Disability. I swear this is how we should think. And we talked about childhood disability because that's the particular focus that young Willem and I have. But as time has gone on, and not very much time needed to pass before people said, well, this isn't just about childhood disability. These are F words for child development. And other people said, well, these are not just for children. This is for everybody. And so these ideas have expanded considerably. And so what you see, I see F words, are efforts to bring the ICF framework to life. With respect to body structure and function, we want to emphasize and get people to think about fitness, mental health, and physical well-being. With respect to activity, we talk about functioning, however you do things. With respect to participation, and because we were specifically interested in children, we emphasize friendships because that's such an important part of children's growing and becoming belonging. With respect to personal factors, we emphasize fun. Because if we can find out what's fun for children, we can build what we call therapy around their interests, and they don't recognize that they're getting therapy. Whereas much of our traditional therapy is boring, sometimes painful, and considered a huge waste of time by a lot of kids, and quite frankly, by a lot of parents. And with respect to environment, the most obvious and central environmental component for children is family. Now, we added the word future. It is not part of the ICF framework, which is a slice in time cross-sectional account of the situation today. We added future to remind people that children and families are a work in progress, and that this picture, however it ends up being populated, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, this picture is likely to change tomorrow, next week, next month. Now, you'll see that we still celebrate and want to use the best of our interventions, but we'd like those interventions to be evidence-based. With respect to family, we are clearly expecting people to be aware of the social determinants of health and take those into account, and to be thinking about how we're doing what we're doing, which means being family-centered. And with respect to the individual, we need to think about what is important to that child, that situation, so that we are individualizing our intervention just as much as we might do with biomedical personalized medicine. And I think it's fair to say that this way of thinking has not been part of how any of us was trained. This is one example, my favorite example, of how we've tried to bring these ideas together. You'll see in the smaller boxes, the ICF language, body structure and function, activity, participation. And you'll see in the larger boxes, the F words with a brief description of what we mean. And you'll also see cartoons, which tend to be rather Eurocentric. And we have had lots of people translating not only the words, but also the graphics. And I talked already about the future as an issue. So here are a couple of examples. The example on the left are the F words in Urdu, and presumably they don't start with F and they don't have the same connotation as they do in English, but the ideas of fitness and function and family and so on are the same. And on the right, you'll see an example of cartoons which are now culturally relevant, in this case, to people in communities where Tamil is the first language. That would be in South India and in Sri Lanka, among other places. So these ideas, as you see, are hugely adaptable to both the language and the presentation of them. And if you want to see more, all you have to do is Google F words or CanChild and F words, and there is a ton of information on our website, almost all of it, if not all of it, free for you to use and look at. Okay, so I said that good ideas are nice, but so what? And we have a vast amount of evidence of the impact of these ideas. Parents absolutely love them because, as you'll see, these ideas give parents an opportunity to present their child as a person and not as a case. Service providers increasingly are using these. Whole programs are rebuilding what they do from the ground up, from intake to programmatic input to sharing the results of their observations about kids with other people in the community around the F words. We've had a long and I think enviable relationship, we CanChild, with the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. And they not only have brought the F words into the center of their revised approach to the Smart Start hubs across the province, but they funded us to a very considerable and generous level to create a series of F words modules so that parents and service providers can understand what we're talking about, how to use them, how they work, and so on. And we have the opportunity to work with colleagues in many countries who've approached us to do research on promoting these ideas, packaging these ideas, delivering and implementing these ideas in their own communities. And this is a tremendous opportunity for us and a privilege for us because we learn what are the challenges in other places. And I'm going to give some examples of the impacts that people have reported to us. So here's a mother who said some years ago, you will gather information from reports, testing, and individual educational plan goals, and this will give you invaluable insights into my son's needs. For a fuller picture of my awesome child, however, I would like to present you with the following document from my child about my child. And then she presents an F words profile, of which there are a variety of ways to do this. And so what we're talking about then is an F words profile that it introduces a child and a family, not a case, not a situation, not a problem. Of course, the child is there because of some functional issue, but the way in which we talk about it from the get-go is different from our traditional emphasis on the catalog of doom. And quite frankly, if you want to test this out, ask parents you're meeting for the first time to tell you about their child, and you'll often get an account of all the things the child can't do, because that's what's been the focus. And I will listen to parents and I'll say, okay, hold on, I want to hear about the issues and the concerns, but first of all, what do you want to boast about? And sometimes parents are completely awestruck by that question because nobody's ever asked them. And focusing on the child as a person and then on the issues gives us a whole different way of looking at the situation. Another parent who said, it's been huge for us, although they're just 6 simple words. They've just changed the whole way we look at living. And I think that's the key idea. It's a different way of looking at things. Many of you will know the expression, if I hadn't believed it, I wouldn't have seen it. That's an important aphorism because it conditions what we see. If we have certain beliefs about things, that's what we see, that's what we focus on. And by turning that on its head, we then see and look at things differently. And the youth associated with his parents said, they're my F words, my dreams, my goals, my ambitions. A program manager said, I think it's really universal language that can be used, that we can use across teams, across agencies, across systems, that really works from a family-centered place. None of this is about a specific biomedical or developmental condition. This is not about autism. It is not about cerebral palsy. It is not about Tsutsugamushi fever. It is about children. It is about people. It is about circumstances. And by framing this in the way that I'm going to show you, we have a different way of starting our discussion. Two stories, both spontaneous from colleagues. A quick email to share a happy story. This is on a Monday following the previous Wednesday when we had been at a CPNet Science and Family Day. And my friend writes and says, today in clinic, I saw a child who has cerebral palsy and is functioning at a GMFCS level 5, which is significantly functionally challenged, whose mother attended CPNet Science and Family Day last Wednesday when we did a presentation on the F words with some young people. She reported to me, the mother reported to me that her entire approach to raising her son has shifted from one of fixing to embracing the F words and a wellness approach. She came to clinic with her goals related to the F words all worked out and felt very empowered. I couldn't be more pleased. And the word empowered is really significant. I don't have time to talk today about a program we've been doing with parents, but empowerment is enormously important. And the F words are one of the ways to empower parents to take control of their situation and how they talk about their child and their family. And this is a message, or a message from another colleague today. I saw a 6-year-old girl with CP, GMFCS level 5, refugee from another country. Parents had tried stem cell therapy in a foreign country. They came here to Canada with hopes to help her. We had a long consult with the whole team, trying to answer all the questions they had. I tried to explain that we understand what we understand by a functional approach and what the purpose of therapy is. At the end, I showed them the F words poster in Arabic. They read carefully, asked if these words are meant to be their child speaking, and I confirmed. The mom commented under tears, "This is beautiful. That's what I wish for my daughter." So the effort at fixing her, which is impossible, had led to an odyssey that literally went around the world. And here was a different way of looking at things. Not going to fix the daughter, but it's going to change the way the parents think about her and relate to her. Of course, there are challenges. I would say that we still continue to experience barriers for some of our work and community partners in making that shift. I'm referring to all community members, so social services, child welfare, mental health, school system. There are huge challenges in moving this forward. But if we look back to where we were when we started 10 years ago, the distance we've traveled has been huge. But if you're looking for challenges, come and talk to me because we've got work to do still. I want to show you a few examples of F words tools that have been created by parents, by colleagues, and shared with us. They give us permission. Anything you'll find on our website is there with the permission of the people who created it, with attribution to them. We don't claim ownership of the ideas that they have created or the ways that they've done things. And again, go there, have a look, see if you find things you like. If you don't like them, that's fine. If you do like them, use them. This was the very first tool. This was an F words agreement created by a parent in the UK who, soon after the paper was first published, wrote to me. I thought she was a therapist, and she was asking about my thoughts about therapy for children in school. And I wrote back and I commented on what I thought were the issues as I understood them from her question. and sent her the paper and said, tell me more about the child. And she said, well, actually, it's Alfie, my son. And the therapist is very upset with him using a walker. She wants him to have lots of therapy. And that led to considerable discussion back and forth. And Diane created this F words agreement, a kind of credo. And she puts this on the back of her son's wheelchair, as do many other parents. Function, family, fitness. These are the things that are important to me. Please respect me as a child. This is a collage developed by Daniela, who's again a close friend and colleague, parent of a now 21-year-old with cerebral palsy. And she's an IT expert and created a collage. This is the version on the website that you can download so that you as a family or you as a service provider can populate it with pictures to illustrate things. And this is an earlier version of the Seeley's F words collage. Function, what's he doing? He's playing soccer. Well, wait a minute, he's got level 5 cerebral palsy. Yes, but he also plays in a disability program, which is enormously important to him, provides him with opportunities for functioning, for fun. He's there with his family, and he's doing things that are really important to him. Family, you see him here with his grandparents who live in Serbia. And when he's here in Canada, he is with his grandparents every day at the end of the day on Zoom for several hours. Fitness, he's done a variety of things in the past. Fun, he loves swimming and can actually swim on his own with appropriate supports. Friends is a challenge, and his mom and I and many of us have had conversations about this. This is a challenge for kids, young people with impairments. And with respect to future, one of his goals was to finish high school, which he's doing. This is another way for people to present their ideas and for this to be done collaboratively between parents and service providers. And this is an F words goal sheet, the key idea of which is, here's the goal. Why is that important? And if we know why it's important, we may have suggestions about how to approach it. We may also hear that this is important because everybody says it's important, but our conversation with the family or with a young person may be that this is probably less important than people say it is. But so this getting under the surface of what we do to why we're doing it and how we're doing it can be very important. Just to illustrate that a 7-year-old can self-disclose literally with her, in this case, her drawings and her words. Fitness for her is skipping. Function is talking to a friend. Friendships is being in a friend's room. Family, she's got a parent with a beard, a parent without a beard, presumably her mother. She's got a pet, she's got a sibling. Fun is playing at a friend's house. So I'll pause briefly to say that you'll see that 3 of the 6 drawings are about friends and how important that is to her. And with respect to future, she's on a boat in the ocean being a mom with a baby in her belly, and she's holding a sunshine balloon. So if you want to know what's going on with kids, ask them, give them a chance to talk, give them a chance to draw, give them a chance to self-report. And this is really, I think, quite fascinating. So if we think about this boy, we could spend an hour just talking about him. This is a boy with cerebral palsy, and clearly he has lots of functional challenges. And because we're not having a conversation face to face, I can't ask you what you see, but some of you will see that he's ready to go to junior kindergarten, and he seems to be a happy kid. Some of you will be appalled by his posture. Some of you will be excited by all the equipment he has. Some of you will be wondering why the hell he isn't getting more care, because clearly he's got lots of problems. What we want to emphasize is that we're focusing on what he can do versus what he cannot do. If he gets 1,000 years of the best therapy we can offer on July 20 or June 26th, 2024, 1,000 years of that therapy, he will still have cerebral palsy based on what we know how to do right now. We want to promote his development, i.e. getting to school. We want to promote functioning, i.e. independent mobility, even though it's powered. We want to promote child and family strengths, achievement, being family-centered, and thinking life course. Where's he going in life? Where might he be able to go, even though he can't walk? And we want to de-emphasize fixing because we can't fix him. We want to de-emphasize normality because, as I said earlier, it's a dumb idea. And we want to recognize that in World Health Organization language, disability is a social construct. So here we have a boy who has power mobility, who has the ability to go to school, apparently, because he's about to go to his first day of junior kindergarten. He gets to school, and there are stairs to the front door and no ramp. And now he is disabled by factors outside himself. He got there, he's ready to learn. The environment is interfering with his ability to do that. And this notion of disability takes the issue outside of the person and puts it in our laps as the people, as the citizens in the community who can, with good intentions and good effort, promote and empower people, despite the fact that they do things differently. Now, people have challenged us and say, well, you're saying that you don't need therapy and therapists. No, we're not saying that. We're not saying that professionals and our work are a waste of time. We're not throwing away therapy. We're not throwing away interventions. This is not a test. There's no score. It's not a measure. It's a way of thinking. What it does do is it encourages people to see the child as a whole person in the context of their family, their community, their likes and dislikes, and so on. It increases the role of parents and their voices and the voices of young people to emphasize their values and their goals so that we're working with them in ways that are consistent with what they want in life. It changes the parent-professional relationship and empowers us as professionals to work more effectively with families. And it encourages us, as I said earlier, to focus on what and why versus just how and what. One idea is to start early. This is a photograph sent to me by one of my good friends whose grandchild at 6 months already knew about F words. And I think this is a riot. We have a ton of information about the ICF and the F words ideas. They are key elements of the Envisage program, which is a program I can talk about another time, which empowers parents and service providers to think and act differently. And we have a huge amount of evidence of the value of that program. So to summarize, new ideas and frameworks are expanding the spotlight beyond the biomedical, beyond the diagnosis, beyond the classic therapies. We're not throwing out what works, but we're challenging people to think more broadly, to be more inclusionary, to rule in rather than rule out. I've said several times that we have a lot of evidence that these ideas and tools are making a huge difference to people's lives. They're free for the taking. Please have a look at them. If you like them, use them. If you have good ideas and you want to share them with us, we'd be happy to hear from you, and we'll attribute your ideas to you. So thank you very much, and let's have some time for discussion.
Thank you, Peter. Excellent presentation.
Okay, so thank you, Peter. Every time I hear you talk about this, I'm always inspired and energized. At the same time, I'm thinking about the barriers and challenges that you kind of hinted on, and specifically the way governments think and the way governments function in terms of budgets and funding.
Yep.
And I remember a few years ago, I mentioned to you that funding is another F word that I see as being very connected to all of this. So my question is about, how do you, in your interactions with policymakers and decision makers, how do you incorporate the idea of funding and support for services and programs related to all of these efforts?
Well, remember that I mean, there may be some policymakers on this talk, but if they are, they're unusual because they have particular interest in this. We don't go to their meetings, they don't come to our meetings. And so unless we sit down with them and have coffee with them and talk with them about new ways of thinking, we can't blame them for being in the 20th century where most of us have been. So the responsibility we have is to share these ideas and these new ways of thinking, and also help them see how the ways that we're talking and thinking probably are cost beneficial. We don't have evidence for that, but I'm absolutely convinced it's the case with no evidence to support that. So the jury will disregard that remark at this point. The problem I have, and I said this publicly at the talk I gave at Kids Brain Health Network last autumn, is that having policies, for example, a national autism strategy is like having a national prostate cancer strategy. And that was formulated by you and Olaf and me because we're all men and we all have prostates, and the women don't have prostates and they also get cancers, but prostate cancer is most important. That would be unacceptable. That would be unethical. And I think the challenge we have is to get beyond the idea that we fund certain conditions and privilege certain conditions. They're all important, and none of them is more important than others. But from a policy point of view, we still have that issue. And colleagues in Alberta are tearing their hair about this, because Alberta is very strict about this, and this leads to an epidemic of diagnosis. That's the short answer.
Peter, has this approach been used in schools or communicated for use in schools? I think this would be so helpful.
Aha, the next frontier. We've had many, many, many conversations. We have individual parents introducing their children to schools in the with an F words profile to start with, which introduces the child as a person, as I said earlier. The frontier that we see is to have the kind of conversations I was just saying in my answer to Stelios's question with people in the Ministry of Education, to help them see that this is a different way of thinking about children, that we got to get past the idea that we can't accommodate kids because we don't have a physiotherapist or we don't have a speech therapist in our school. Therefore, the kid with a communication disorder can't come to our school. If we think about how we can enhance functioning, and I will say tolerate and quite frankly encourage functioning in different ways, then we may free everybody up from the feeling that they're doing it wrong or they're going to break something if they don't do it right or if they don't have the resources. This is an area that requires a great deal of further thought and energy. And if anybody wants to do their PhD with us on this, give us a call.
You mentioned, I think, earlier in your presentation that this framework is not how you were trained, I guess, as a professional, as a medical professional. Do you think this has changed over the years? Is there room for hope in terms of this notion of starting early? Is medical school training maybe improved or is different today than, versus when you began? And can this be integrated somehow?
There's lots of room for hope. There's very little, there's very little evidence that these ideas are being taught. Olaf and I have tried repeatedly to encourage the medical school and the nursing school and physio school and so on to introduce these ideas early on. And it is hit and miss. But our Department of Pediatrics does not teach any of this actively and formally. And to our knowledge, no medical school in Canada teaches the ICF, which is totally absurd. It's a World Health Organization framework. It is completely non-categorical, non-denominational. It's a way of thinking and is applicable to virtually everything we do in medicine, but we're still not teaching it. We're still focusing on diseases.
Do you have any inkling why that might be?
Conservatism. We've always done it this way. We know it works. That's BS. But, we're going to keep trying.
I'm sure we can throw a couple more F words in there about that, right? You mentioned that some programs or service providers, I guess, who are rebuilding what they were doing in terms of an F words framework. Can you elaborate a little bit? I'd love some maybe examples about how that might be integrated into somebody's practice. I can definitely see a way of thinking as being a huge change, more so than just integrating a new test or a measure. So some examples.
The infant parent program in Halton, the early development program in Halton, completely revised their program from the bottom up, built around the F words. The Children's Treatment Network, which is one of the 20 odd regional children's disability programs in Ontario, Children's Treatment Network of York Simcoe has revised their whole program around the F words, from intake to the ways in which they offer their services, the ways they talk, the way they help parents move, as I said earlier, from the preschool programs into school and so on. And the same things happen in Kingston, where we've had champions who bring together the social, the medical, the educational sectors, and have created a fabric of service of thinking that is seamless. So it can be done.
Can this be integrated as a health equity approach within the OPHS standards? What might be a good starting point?
OPHS, I don't deal with acronyms very well.
Ontario Public Health Standards is what the quick Google tells me.
Yes, and thank you for raising the question about equity, because this is, as I've said several times, a universal framework, and may have different understandability to people from different cultures. One of our postdocs, Vanessa Thomas, is doing some excellent work with First Nations communities, both in Ontario and in Manitoba, to understand how they think about health and how they interpret these ideas. And there is a reasonable fit from the things that we're talking about and the things that they do already. So I think it's a good point about the equity lens. This is not about, it is not culture, it's not grounded in culture, but it clearly is influenced by what disability means in different cultures, what family means in different cultures, where, for example, grandparents and aunts and uncles and others may play a very important day-to-day role in the lives of children. And we have opportunities to, which we're just beginning to explore, to try to share these ideas with grandparents and others. Grandparents, speaking as a grandparent, are a generation older, hence a generation wiser, maybe, hence a generation more out of date, maybe. And if they understand these ideas, they may also find them very useful and liberating. That's to be explored.